Hey gang, I'm Jim Zub. I'm a professional comic book writer who's done work for just about every major comic publisher in North America. And over the past 10 years, I've put together all kinds of tutorial posts and blog posts about working in the business, trying to demystify some of the things about working in comics, writing comic book stories, and working with creative teams. Uh, this set of videos is really my chance to kind of put a face to some of those posts and to, in a more casual way, talk about the working process. A lot of the questions that I'm answering here come from either my Patreon or the Comic School Discord channel. On those two outlets, people have been asking me questions about what it's like to work in comics and specific pitfalls and things that they can avoid. This particular question, I think, is a really important one, and it comes from Mike Spears. So Mike asks, can you discuss hiring an artist on your creator-owned projects? That's a great question, Mike. And in order to answer that question, I think it's a good idea for me to kind of go through a little bit of a history of my creator-owned projects, introduce each one, explain how those creative teams came together and the specific kind of challenges that we had as we were working away on the series. Now, the first one out of the gate, and the one that really kind of broke me into the industry at large, is called Skullkickers. And that is a fantasy comedy series, this action adventure sword and sorcery series that I did at Image Comics. It went from 2010 to 2015. We did 34 issues in total, and those were collected in 6 trade paperbacks. That series, though, had a kind of a long gestation period in terms of how it was put together. The original Skullkickers stories were actually 2 short stories that appeared in the Image anthologies, Pop Gun 2 and Pop Gun 3. And series co-creator and artist Chris Stevens and I put together this pair of troublemaking mercenary characters. They went through these 2 short stories in the Pop Gun anthologies, and that, as a proof of concept, was good enough for us to get the green light from Image to do it as what was originally supposed to be a mini-series and eventually rolled out into an ongoing series. Now, Chris did an amazing job on those original stories, and he ended up redesigning the characters extensively for when we were going to do the full monthly series. The digital painted look that he did for Pop Gun just wasn't going to be possible on a regular monthly book. Chris put together an extensive set of designs. He also penciled out just over half of the first issue of the series before he was unable to keep working away on it. Personal issues and financial stuff got in the way. And so I originally thought that Skullkickers was going to kind of get thrown in a drawer and never be completed. But thankfully, around 8 to 9 months later, I was contacted by an artist named Edwin Huang. Now, at the time, I was working at the Udon studio. I was project managing on a bunch of their commercial projects and creative design projects. And Edwin reached out to me to show me his portfolio. That ended up becoming a back and forth conversation. And even though Udon didn't have work for him at the time, I ended up working with him and trying to improve his, portfolio, which turned into him penciling the back half of the first issue, inking the entire first issue. And by the time we finished that issue, I made the offer to Edwin to take over Skullkickers and to start drawing the regular, book. So we would go on and work together throughout the entire series. Chris would do a bunch of covers moving forward. And so it is a creator-owned series, but Edwin Huang, in this case, is not the co-creator of Skullkickers. He came on board later as a work for hire artist. But that being said, he also drew on every single issue of the series and did the interiors on all 34 issues. So it's a bit of a complex situation. Instead of it just being a simple delineation between, co-creator and, artist and what may have you, we've now got this kind of split. So with Skullkickers, I learned a ton about how to produce a book, how to get stuff done on time, how to get things ready for the printer, all those other kinds of elements, project management and accounting and contracts and all that kind of stuff. It was the testing ground for me and the rest of the creative team as we got a handle on how this stuff worked. And so of the creator-owned projects I've done, I'd say it's definitely the most jumbled, but it's also the one where I kind of figured out a method and a breakdown that works best for me on creator-owned projects. And I'm going to talk about that after I kind of go through the history of all those books. So Skullkickers wrapped up in 2015, but in 2014, I ended up releasing my second major creator-owned series. That's a series called Wayward. That was co-created and developed with an artist named Stephen Cummings. Now, Stephen is an amazing artist who I also met at the Udon studio. We worked together on a bunch of different commercial work. And the genesis of Wayward actually comes from an Udon project. So there was an anthology that we did at Udon called Vent, and it was a way for all of the creators who were working at the studio at the time to vent their ideas, their own creative concepts that they hoped they would be able to turn into bigger things later on. One of the images in that particular anthology was a pinup that Stephen put together with this cool looking girl with these spiked bats and these creepy supernatural cats. Years later, when I was in the midst of doing Skullkickers, Stephen reached out to me again, and we started talking about the possibilities of doing a creator-owned book. I was already developing a concept for kind of a fantasy in the modern world story. And then Stephen, realizing he still hadn't developed the kind of Japanese ghost story that he had been talking about, we merged those two ideas together, came up with a cast of characters, and that would eventually become Wayward, that would launch at Image in the fall of 2014. We ended up doing 30 issues together, 6 trade paperbacks, also got released in 3 beautiful deluxe hardcovers. It was an amazing ride to work on this series with Stephen. And thankfully, the stuff that I learned on Skullkickers really carried through strongly on Wayward. We had much clearer delineation in terms of the creative team stuff, in terms of the way that contracts were built, and the percentages, and all the stuff that we did that made that series function. It was an amazing ride, and I'm so glad that I had that experience and working away with Stephen, Tamara, and Marshall. I need to say as well on Skullkickers, everyone that worked on the book as well. You've got Misty Coates, and we've got Marshall again. Marshall Dillon is like my ace in the hole. He's my letterer on all my creator-owned books so far, and I can't imagine working with anyone else on lettering on this stuff. Anyways, moving right along. After Skullkickers wrapped up, but while Wayward was still going, I wanted to have this overlapping, kind of creator-owned concepts always on the go. Glitter Bomb is my third major creator-owned book, also produced at Image Comics. That one was done with Jabril Morsetfan, and I met Jabril just at a convention. So unlike Skullkickers or Wayward, where I had previous working relationships, or the Udon studio provided an outlet where I was able to meet these artists. With Jabril, I was at Montreal Comic-Con, and I just came across his work. A mutual friend introduced me to Jabril, showed me his samples, and I thought his work was so amazing, particularly for how young he was, and I immediately wanted to work with him on a project. After the convention, I followed up. We started developing Glitter Bomb, put together samples, and then I would end up pitching the story to Image, and they would pick it up. Once again, I think that Glitter Bomb really benefited from having clear delineation and the experiences of what I'd learned on Skullkickers and with Wayward. Glitter Bomb's creative team. So you've got Jabril, obviously, doing the line art and the designs. You've got K. Michael Russell doing the colors, and Marshall Dillon is back doing the lettering on the series. You put all of them together, it's a really nice package. Everyone delivered the goods, and I just learned a lot about how to make a project hit and how things function. My next creator-owned series, and the current one that was just released through Dark Horse Comics, is called Stone Star, and it's a colorful action-adventure space fantasy. It's about a roving gladiatorial arena that moves from planet to planet. Max Dunbar and I developed this concept together. Colorist Espen Grundahjern came in and added just phenomenal mood and atmosphere with his colors. And then Marshall Dillon's back again, lettering my creator-owned stuff because he's the best. The series was originally released digitally through the Comixology Originals initiative. And now the print version is out through Dark Horse as part of a broader deal that Comixology has put together with Dark Horse. Each of those 4 titles is so special to me because they are creator-owned, because I worked with the team to develop this thing from the ground up and make something really, really special and unique that we hadn't done before and wasn't based on a prior license. or property or publisher initiative or anything like that. It was stuff that we were passionate about building from the ground up. And that's what makes Creator Owned so potent, is because every single one is a passion project. Every single one is the will and the hard work of those creative teams putting them together. So with that all out of the way, let's talk about what those creative team makeups look like. So in any particular creative team, for your traditional kind of comic, there's 4 major roles that tend to come out. You've got your writer, you've got your line artist, your colorist, and your letterer. Yes, there may be other people involved in the production. Sometimes on a creator-owned book, you have an editor, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have a formal project manager, other times you don't. There are all kinds of other roles and designers and things that can work their way into it. But these tend to be the 4 major roles that you're going to need in order to finish the comic. In many cases, the writer and the line artist are the co-creators. They've come up with the concept first, and they're usually bringing the colorist and the letterer on board later in the process. It's not always the case, but in the case of, my creator-owned books, that has been the situation. Now, this is how I've structured sort of the deal as it stands. So as the writer, I am the one covering upfront expenses in many cases. Now, depending on who we're working with, whether it's Image or Comixology, there may be an upfront amount of money coming from them that help cover these expenses. But if that doesn't cover the entire amount, and in many cases it doesn't, I'm covering the difference personally out of pocket. And therefore, I'm going to get paid back on that stuff before there's any profitability. And so I do have a page rate built into the deal that is structured, but my page rate is going to come after the book comes out, after money is made, after other expenses are paid back. So my page rate is kind of the last thing in the chain before we reach profitability. In the case of the line artist, they're paid a page rate as the work is completed, and they're going to get a profit split. In the case of the colorist, they're getting a page rate as the work is completed, and there are bonuses that are paid depending on the long-term profitability of the series. In the case of the letterer, exact same thing. The page rate is paid as the work is completed, and bonuses are then paid depending on the long-term profitability of the series. So you've got these different kind of strata and things breaking down. And I know at first it looks kind of bad for the writer, depending on how you want to look at it, because you're the last person being paid, you're the person paying up front. But the reality is, in terms of production, it makes sense for the way that I do my stuff. First of all, it is a heck of a lot faster to develop a story and to write a script than it is to draw those pages. There's a reason why you see writers juggling multiple projects at the same time. In my case, I can juggle 3-4 different comic projects, and I still have a full-time job teaching. Whereas an artist, if you want to have any kind of regular production and you want this book to come out on time, they're going to need to draw this thing 5, 6, 7 days a week. It's going to take them, even a very productive artist who is putting out 4 to 5 pages a week. And again, it really depends on how detailed it is, how quick they are, what the style of the comic is going to be. They're going to end up working the vast majority of the month away just on that one single project in order to have regular output. A writer can juggle all kinds of different projects. A writer can also have a day job and do other things and still manage to make this stuff productive. Yes, there are exceptions. Sometimes there are line artists who are juggling other jobs at the same time. They're doing the creator-owned book on weekends, or they're doing it in their spare time. But again, it all depends on productivity, and it depends on the scheduling that you're putting together. In the case of something like Skullkickers or Wayward or Glitter Bomb or Stone Star, the art team, the project we were doing together was their full-time job. For basically 5 years, Stephen Cummings was drawing Wayward. He was doing the odd commission here or there, but almost no other comic work intruded on that time because Wayward was all encompassing to his schedule. So with that in mind, he needs that page rate in order to live, in order to function, in order to pay his rent and pay for the groceries and get by. Whereas, myself as the writer, I was able to do other things, take on other projects, and kind of amortize those expenses over other income that was coming in the door. With the colorist, with the letterer, same kind of thing. They're juggling multiple projects, but they're also paid less comparatively speaking. A letterer needs to juggle, a ton of different books in order to make that their full-time job. Same thing with the colorist. They're usually doing 3, 4, 5 different projects, depending on what's going on, if they're full-time. There are all kinds of other expenses involved though. And those are things that, I was covering up front depending on how much they would cost. So, sometimes we would have editorial or proofreading involved in a particular project. You've got graphic design or logo design happening as part of a project. Several of my books have back matter writing. So for Wayward, we would have these really cool essays all about Japanese lore and creatures and culture. And those were put together by Zach Davison. He did an amazing job. In the case of Glitter Bomb, we had these really fascinating snapshot essays about Hollywood and some of the pitfalls of the industry that Holly Hughes put together. And those have to be paid for. Those are just part of the production expense. In a lot of cases, we had variant covers that had to be covered. So you're paying those other artists and illustrators, all the contracts that are getting drawn up, all the stuff that has to be done in terms of the legal fees. We didn't spend a lot on advertising and promotion. Thankfully, that kind of stuff is being covered by Image. That stuff is being covered by, Dark Horse or Comixology. But in some cases, that can add into your expenses as well. In the case of printing and shipping, both Image and Dark Horse are covering those expenses. But if you were doing this as a Kickstarter, if you were doing this as an independent project, those fees have to be factored into everything that you do and your long-term profitability. And so it's really crucial that you're keeping this stuff, in mind, and that you're thinking and budgeting for these things as you put together the creative team. I really, really want to stress time and time again, because I know what's going to happen. I've got this graphic up here. Someone's going to screenshot it and they're going to say, oh, this is how creator-owned books have to work. Has to be 50% for the writer. It has to be 50% for the co-creator, line artist, whatever. And the reality is that is not true. This is just one example. This is the way that I have put this stuff together for my creative teams, at this time. Different financial setups can work just as well. Here's what's most important when it comes to making a creative team. Everyone on the creative team knows what is expected of them because communication is clear. They know what they have to deliver. They know the schedule that they have to deliver it on, and they know what they're being paid and when. Okay. Also, equally important is that everyone gets properly credited for their work. And so that they are able to use this as a credit, they're able to use this as part of their career. Those are the two kind of pillars of building a creative team. Every deal is going to be different. It's not about here are the exact percentages that you need to have. Sometimes a writer is going to make more because they're sinking more money into it. Sometimes the line artist is going to make more because they need those kinds of page rates in order to live, or the art's going to take a much longer period of time, or whatever is needed for printing, for shipping, for advertising, for promotion, for all those different things. I'm not here to tell you, here's exactly how you have to structure this stuff out. And one of my fears about putting this video together, again, is that people are going to make a lot of assumptions like, oh, Jim says you have to do it like this, therefore every deal has to follow this kind of pattern. That's not the case. I'm showing you what I do and how it's worked well for me, but this is just one example of a creator-owned deal. What's really, really important is clarity, and what's really important is good communication. Each one of these creator-owned projects for me is like a little time capsule. I remember where I was when the project started. I remember where I was at key moments of its production and how proud I was, when the book was released, and how proud I still am of every single one. And the reason why those good memories continue to roll is because I'm working with amazing people and I'm treating them well. I respect their time. I respect their hard work. And I want to keep doing this stuff. I want to keep making amazing stories and new creator-owned projects. So I hope you found this illuminating. I hope this gives you a bit of a sense of structure. I'm trying not to worry about exact dollars and cents. Page rates may vary. Schedules can vary. Everyone's time is different. And there's no wrong answers as long as everyone involved knows what they need to do. If you're looking for more information on making creator-owned comics, feel free to check out my website. I have over 40 articles for free talking about how to write a story for comics, how to pitch your own ideas, some of the economics of creator-owned comics, and frequently asked questions that I get about working in the industry. If you want to take a deeper dive into how this stuff works, check out my Patreon. For the price of a fancy coffee, you can dig through over 250 scripts and then look at them side by side with the published version that you can get on Comixology or in print, and then see the development process, how we start with an initial pitch, how that moves through the scripting phase, and what that ends up looking like in the final. It's a real good way of kind of peeling back the different layers and understanding how a comic book is made. If all this stuff has been helpful to you, please share it with other people. Let them know that there's good resources here, and go forth and make your own comics.